Last week's episode was cut off rather abruptly. I have a problem in that I seem to be unable to upload more than about 12 or 13 minutes worth of material to YouTube at any one time. But we started looking at Albert Camus' The Outsider. So what I propose to do this week is to start this episode with some of the material that I intended to use last week, and then go on to look at The Myth of Sisyphus, which was the next book we were going to check. We probably won't get very far in that this week, but we'll have to continue that in further episodes. Yeah, so it's as though Camus I'm not sure if this is right, but Camus seems to be saying Meursault understands something that most people don't. Life is short and fleeting, and according to him, there's nothing after this life on earth. So we need to grasp and appreciate every bit of experience we can have here, and not to even hope for anything more or want anything more. It's sort of, we're fooling ourselves, we're cowardly, we're deceiving ourselves if we look for anything more. If one has courage, and if one is bold enough to see the truth and face it, then one would do what Meursault does and what Kirillov perhaps does, to give up or cause myself to lose my life, even though life is the only thing I've got. I think that's kind of what he's saying, and it's almost as though he's saying, well, the rest of us who don't hold that belief, we're not as good as Meursault because we fool ourselves, or we allow ourselves to be fooled by other things, by maybe religion, he would say, to persuade ourselves that there's something beyond this life. And we do that because we're cowards, we don't have the courage to face up to what Meursault has understood. I think that's perhaps what he's saying, I'm not sure really. I mean, just about all of his books are to do with dying quickly, as I said, being executed in this one, suicide he talks about in The Myth of Sisyphus. Another one of his novels, The Plague, talks about everyone dying rapidly because of a plague that afflicts a town in Algiers. And maybe the plague itself is his representation of death, perhaps. And how do people cope with the knowledge that that's going to happen? A bit later on in the book, though, he does talk about what he calls a wind blowing from the future, that he describes as a kind of a force or a pressure that's pushing back against him for the future. So what does he mean by that? If there is no future for him, once he's died, there's nothing, then why is he considering a future? And what is this force or wind? He doesn't really quite explain what that is, and maybe doesn't really know. He also talks at one stage about being one with the universe, which is a very popular thought nowadays, of course. But so maybe he is thinking about kind of something beyond this immediate life on earth, that one becomes one with. And that was a very popular idea even in the 19th century, and people like Haeckel and so on that talked about just the universe is one conscious entity and we're all part of it and we'll always be part of it. So he doesn't dwell a lot on that, but Camus doesn't dwell a lot on that, but he brings those ideas up, so presumably they were there in his mind at that time as well. So now we're looking at The Myth of Sisyphus. So both this and The Outsider, or L'Étranger, were published in 1942, which suggests that Camus was probably writing them both at the same time. They certainly deal with almost the same idea, so it seems logical that they're both products of the same thought process that he was going through. So a few weeks ago in one of these commentary sessions I mentioned that if we're talking about Camus and then people like Sartre and so on, eventually one is going to have to bring up those words existentialism and the absurd. And at the time I suggested that I wasn't really looking forward to having to do that because they're just words that are bandied about so much and sort of obligatory to mention in philosophical or literary articles or exam papers, and but what, if anything, do they really mean? But so now coming to the myth of Sisyphus, we have no choice but to look at them because they're really the basis of that book. And to be honest, he does go some way to really explaining what he means by it. Camus does in this book. So existentialism, I presume means, and again I haven't really seen this written down in print by anyone, but my understanding of that term is that it describes the condition in which human beings do actually exist. We are alive, we're biological organisms that really exist in the world. The world isn't just a construct or a fantasy or an illusion. The world really is here, and we really are here. That somehow in the past there was a chemical reaction in some mist or swamp of chemicals that brought about more complex chemicals, and then some Darwinian process of chance mutations, and then which then confers some benefit on the individual that has that mutation, promotes the reproduction of that individual. So by that process, human beings have come to be, and we are here. And we are intelligent so that we can think things, have ideas, plan things, create things. And that we are also conscious so that we know we are here. So we exist, we know we exist, but soon we won't exist, as each individual will die soon. So for each individual human being, we have he has that knowledge that he exists, but he won't exist soon, and that's a very difficult thing to understand or to take account of. Really, I am here. I know I'm here. I've got this experience, this lived experience. Soon that will disappear. There'll be none of it left. And how can I cope with that idea? So I think that's what they mean by existentialism. And then absurd follows quite logically on from that, because it implies the difficulty that one has with knowing that one is here, that one won't be here, and that there's no meaning to any of it. And that's what Camus is talking about when he talks about the absurd. So if we look at Samuel Beckett, as I mentioned last week, an Irish playwright who was in that absurd tradition, I suppose, and his plays often deal with that problem and that dilemma that human beings have. But in another sense, they present this more conventional idea of the absurd in something silly or ridiculous. And so his most famous play is Waiting for Godot. There are quite a lot of others, but they all deal with similar thoughts or ideas of human beings who repeat their kind of trivial daily existence over and over again without any change, or human beings who have enough intelligence to try to cope with a problem and to deal with it. But the intelligence of human beings is very limited, really, and we get into trouble and make silly mistakes. And so his plays are really quite funny. A lot of them are, not all of them, but some of them are quite funny, with characters almost like Laurel and Hardy kind of people. So they're funny, they're absurd in that funny sense, but they're also absurd in the sense of the limitations of humanity and ultimately the pointlessness of it, I suppose. But what Camus means by the absurd, and I'll read some quotations from the book, but probably won't have time to do that in this episode, but just to summarise briefly, his idea of the absurd is that human beings would like there to be some meaning to our existence, but there isn't. And so it's hard for us to marry those ideas up. We want there to be meaning, we think there should be meaning, but there isn't, it seems. And that's very hard to live with. He also talks at one stage about a kind of a nostalgia for a time when there was meaning, which is interesting. I don't know if he's talking about Eden, perhaps, before the fall, when we knew that God was right there with us. We met him face to face, and we knew that he loved us and cared for us, but now we've lost Eden because of our fall, and we can't see God face to face anymore. Camus, of course, denies that there is a God at all, but so it's interesting that he talks about this nostalgia for a time when there was meaning. So basically, the absurd in his mind is the fact that we think there should be some meaning to our life, there should be some point in this existence, but there isn't. It's here for a moment, it'll be gone soon, and we won't exist anymore, there'll be nothing left. And how do we cope with that idea? And that's basically what he's talking about in the myth of Sisyphus. But then he also deals with some of the other ways that people try to cope with that idea, that point, try to escape from the dilemma of the absurd. And he lists those and criticises them in turn.